Welcome back, everybody, to the Functional Code. We are excited to bring you guys today another core episode. We are going to dive straight into the science and strategy of muscle growth, muscle health, why it's important, all of those things. Super excited to bring that to you guys today. So as always, I am Dr. Addy.
And I am Dr. Jace. Yeah, we're going to get into some of the core principles, if we will, of how to either schedule out what lifts, what things you want to stimulate, whether it's strength, whether it's speed, whether it's power. And then we're going to get into other specifics of training certain muscle fiber types, type 1 versus type 2. And then also the intensities we'll touch on a little bit, but we've touched on that in a previous recent episode as well. So with some of this, Doc, we're going to dive into, let's go why muscles are important, why muscle growth is needed not only at an early age, but also later on in life, and why having muscle is important to
100%.
humans.
I want to break it down. First and foremost, the most important reason, in my opinion, is because it's one of the only ways that we can measure longevity in humans now. Like, so much research is coming out showing the more muscle mass you have later on in life, the more independent you're going to be, the longer you're going to live, the better health span you're going to have. All of these metrics are showing that muscle mass is its own life system in your body. It's its own organ. You need to continue training it. Being able to maintain strength and size are both important, not just one or the other. Other metrics that they use to measure longevity would be like VO2 max is another one, but those are really the only two that I've heard a lot of big longevity experts talk about, is VO2 max and muscle mass in later years of life. It's not just something that is for aesthetic reasons only. This is truly something that helps improve insulin sensitivity over time, which is another metric that a lot of people use for longevity. It can help continue to increase your metabolism once you have it. There are just so many other things that muscle is important for, but those are the main ones. And it's unfortunate because when we are getting, even in recent times, we're starting to see children have less muscle mass. We're seeing such high rates of obesity compared to where we should be seeing in terms of muscle mass on kids and adults. I think it's getting worse, and we've touched on that in the past. Really, Doc, what are some reasons why you think, and not even that, but what are some of your takes on how muscle should be treated moving forward, maybe versus what we've thought of it?
I like that point. And even going back to what you brought up there, is muscle acting as like a whole system in itself. And especially for us more in recent, at least myself, I'm hearing a lot of people want to lose weight and I want to lose fat and all this stuff. If you build up the muscle tissue around it, that will be working without you even working itself to break down the fat storage. Now, with that, you would want to look at more of a systemic route, but then also localized, which is a whole thing in itself. We've touched on that in previous podcasts, but more or less for this purpose, when we're training and diving into different types of muscle fibers, when we're trying to look and break apart how to build this system up, I think there's a few different key principles that you need, one of which is, if you haven't heard of the sliding filament theory, where the actin and myosin come together and come apart. I've brought this up many other times, to where the one misconception that most people don't take into consideration is that the actin and myosin can also permeate laterally or outwards, which you have to take and consider different ranges of motion where you move the tissues. And not only that, is each motor unit that attaches from the brain through the nervous system to the muscle belly, that attaches that motor unit, and that motor unit then attaches to a sarcomere, or a fibril, if we will. And that is at a deeper level of the muscle belly. So when you look at the machines, and they say if you want to train bicep, like a bicep curl, it's not the whole muscle belly that you may think of. It's each small muscle fibers that you're stimulating, and the more of those that you can stimulate, the more muscle growth that you can have. But you can do it in different ways. Usually, to stimulate muscle, you want a concentric or shortening from one joint to the other, forcing shortening by the muscle belly, and then that then goes into a lengthening or eccentric phase. And you do that for a number of reps, which allow the actin myosin to come apart and together to build up that muscle belly. You don't want to forget about building up the connective tissue or holding contraction at end range or at length or to length, which is a whole thing in itself. But understanding those key principles is very important.
Yep.
And then going into training type 1 versus type 2 muscle fibers. Now, type 1 are the muscle fibers that are contracted for longer periods of time. Those are the ones that hold our spine up as we're walking, or that hold our neck stabilized as we're moving our arms and whatnot with that. So those are the ones that usually, if you have any injury, those are the first to either die off or first to atrophy. And then the type 2 muscle fibers, which are the powerful, the strength, the fast exploding types of muscle fibers that allow you for either quick movements or whatnot with that. Those then take over from an injury, and then those can fatigue really quickly, and then everything can tighten up from there.
Yep.
So that's where you have the muscle guard, and that's where you have the tightness, the tension, the upper, lower back. So when you're very specific on what you're either training or rehabbing, let's say we want to stimulate type 1 muscle fibers. For that, you want to hold a lighter intensity contraction for as long as you possibly can. And you add that in terms of days and reps to build that up from a past injury versus something that you're fast exploding, you're moving a weight at a high intensity, at a higher pace, at a higher speed. So you can vary those up, but there's only pretty much 4 different ways that you can train strength. One of it is either holding a higher intensity or a higher load. So this would be like a 1 rep max. The other one is you would want to do a very small set of repetitions, but at the highest or as fast as you possibly can. And this would be anywhere from you're moving weight or resistance, maybe 60%, 70% your maximum rep strength, and you want to move that as fast as you can. So you still have the resistance, but you're just moving at a quicker pace. That, or you reduce to have no resistance, and then you yourself are moving at as fast as you possibly can. So that'd be 2. The third one is you're going to be moving or addressing and this would be where the third one would be more type 1 muscle fibers, so where you're going time under tension. You're holding that contraction as long as possible, maybe less resistance. You can hold that and vary that resistance. So the less resistance, type 1 muscle fibers, the more resistance, the higher weight that you're holding something for as long as you possibly can. That would be then type 2 muscle fibers. And then the fourth way that you can train strength would be more or less you'd train but not till failure. So that's you're moving resistance anywhere from maybe 50 to 80%, your intensity 40 to 80%, but you're not going to failure. You're just going into what's known as like a retraining zone, not maybe the stimulating zone and not the detraining zone, but you're staying and you're working those tissues just to keep them maintained to a certain extent.
Now, Doc, when you switch up the way you're training like that, those 4 different methods,
Yes.
is that a much better way to get more motor unit involvement versus maybe just sticking to the one method?
Yes. I think there's different ways because your body will acclimate or accommodate would be a better word to the stimulus. So if you're going in, and I know we touched on this in a previous podcast, the stimulating versus retraining versus detraining, all that depends on the stimulus. So let's say for example we want to continue training at either higher strength, or someone has the identity of they only lift heavy.
Sure.
If you're only lifting heavy, like the higher 1 rep max, you're not building in the speed, so you're not activating those motor units. So in your everyday life, unless bodybuilding is your sport and is your skill training and is your workout, that is different than if it is a sport or something that you're training for.
Yeah.
So that would then vary, but whatever it is, let's say you're an athlete, you're training for a sport specifically, you want to look at all the parameters and where you need to train those specific types of movements, whether it's you're training speed in certain positions or certain movements versus a higher intensity versus burning out to failure. So going back to the question, if we're doing the same type of stimulus over and over again, the same motor units are going to be stimulated, but some of the other motor units are not going to be stimulated, which then higher
Yep.
risk of injury.
And I actually love explaining this to patients now. This is a good analogy that a lot of them have been like an aha, which is, think of it like this. You have 10 friends standing around a huge fridge.
Ooh.
You all try to pick it up, but 5 of them just take their hands off and say, I'm going to see if you guys can just lift it by themselves. You would bet that if all 10 were lifting at the same time, you'd have a much better chance of lifting it than just half of them. That is motor units.
I love
and
that.
so during injury or not deconditioned, they're not stimulated enough, or you're not training the certain ones, that's not having enough motor unit involvement with your tissue, and that's why you feel weaker and you're not as strong as you should be. And that's very common after injury. We lose a lot of that connection to those motor units and to the muscle. So think of it like that. Think of it as you have a huge task to fulfill, but only half of them are doing the job. And that's where we need to start recruiting more of them, training them to all be incorporated. And you do that by not letting those training styles get that accommodation. And we need to, what are the way they explain it? Not shock the system, but trick the mind a little bit. Yeah, however you use that to explain. But no, I love that analogy, and I think patients are starting to catch on to that now.
And I think that goes to one of the points as well, like untrained versus trained. So let's say you haven't trained in forever or a long time, but you're starting to work out again. You're going to notice those strength gains much quicker because now you're stimulating those neurons, those motor units to the tissues, and now the tissues are responding. But once they respond, then you can, especially once you start noticing things are plateauing, you're not necessarily untrained, and you're working into consistently trained, that's when more specific, different stimuli maybe need to be added in.
Yep.
So maybe starting off with more like hypertrophic training, to where you want high reps, maybe at a lower maybe higher reps at a lower weight or lower intensity. And then as that gets easier for you, increase the intensity, increase the strength of the load, and then diminish the reps, and then stay there. So that works in hypertrophy into strength, and then from strength you're building everything up, then you go into moving whatever you built up into higher speeds, power speed training, and then offload that and then build it up again. Hypertrophy, strength, power speed, offload, and work up
And you
from
said
there.
that was about 12-ish weeks per category, roughly?
It can be anywhere from 6 to 12. There's a bunch of different mesocycles that you can break apart there, but yeah.
Now, Doc, let's say someone puts a lot of weight on, and how should that change then? You talked about just this a little bit before, where it's going to look a lot different once you have that weight on.
Yes.
And how should you look to train after the weight is on if you are an athlete? Are there things that you're missing once you put that weight on?
I like the point of, if you're going to try to maintain or keep the weight on, you either want to schedule out the times that you are getting to that stimulating phase, to where you're making sure that you're maintaining the tissue that you built up.
Yep.
So that's going to be one. Or the second key point to that is, after each workout, let's say you worked out the higher intensity, maybe a stimulating / retraining phase in terms of how intense you're going at specific areas. Maybe then you want to do a cardio session at the end of the session that day. Vary the intensity of the cardio session, but that bleeds the energy to the muscle tissue that you're trying to build up. But then when you do cardio at the end, it then helps break down the fat stores. So you're getting the fat stores systemically, but then you're also getting it at the local area of whatever you just stimulated. Versus if you would do that at the beginning, you're going to use up some of your energy stores, which is not going to allow you to build up the muscle tissue. So that's more the purpose. So you can either look at it from either building up, scheduling out certain times for certain, say for example, every 20 to 30 days, if you're maintaining a high single, you're going to maintain and keep all the tissues throughout your body. Versus speed, it's every 3 to 8 days. If you're not training at that high speed, you can lose those gains.
Yep.
Strength, hypertrophy, they're like similar in terms of maintaining, but let's say if you want to keep building up, you're going to need you're going to have to train more than 25, 30 some days to build that up. Yeah.
And I know that we had just talked about how when people put weight on, there's a fair amount of speed training they should come after, because more than likely they had to train one way and probably not speed train while that was happening.
Yep.
But if you wanted to be resilient and powerful and explosive and have the ability to use that new mass, that's going to be something you should be focusing on too if you're an athlete.
100%.
Yeah.
And that goes, are you in season, out of season? If you're in season, you'd want to maintain and do training every 3 to 8 days or
Yep.
so at a higher speed or higher velocity, if we will, versus let's say you're off season or you're in a different cycle, depending on how you're training. That is where you still want to add in some cardio, some speed work here
Yep.
and there, but maybe not as frequent. So it depends. There's a lot of different ways that you can go about it because your tissues and your body will adapt to the stimulus over time.
Yep.
So if you're doing the consistent stimulus, or let's say you're consistently lifting heavy, your body is going to acclimate to and accommodate to that stimulus, which will give you more than likely the gains you want. But if you don't switch it up, injury usually occurs for most people.
Yep.
And that's what you don't want because then it sets you back. You have to build that up again. And every injury, for the most part, leaves anatomical change to your structure long term, where you have to consistently monitor that specific injury.
I like that you brought up injury because this is going to roll right into what I wanted to talk about next before we get into recovery, which is we aren't training joints. Most often, people are not training joints how they should be. So how are people why should people not be missing this? And what are some great ways to start implementing that into their training schedule?
I love that. So when you're looking at what specific things that you want to train, or you may be looking at this of, okay, I just want to look good, or I just want to feel good and have the energy. That's fine and dandy, but you have to be specific, because if you're going to go into any bout of training, there's a high risk or a higher risk that you're going to become injured unless you're doing it either safe or smart. So what are you training? So if you're going to go into weightlifting, okay, so most people are going to think, I'm going to train my biceps, triceps, I'm going to do a bench, I'm going to do squats, maybe calf raises, or anything back, push pulls like pull-ups, sit-ups, that like the basics. So that's, and anytime someone thinks about that, they're thinking concentric, shortening, eccentric, over reps. So if you build up the muscle belly too much, the connective tissue, ligaments, tendons will still become weak to a certain extent because you're not focusing the tension there. And those will then yield in terms of tendinosis, sprains, strains, and whatnot with that. So that's where, once we get into joint-specific work, joints are the first signal to the brain, where the tissues overlying it are the second signal to the brain. So joints take first priority. So you'd usually want to start with those either during the workout set or as a warm-up thereof. And then whenever you're moving or training joint-specific movements, those are the filters of your body. So there's an assessment portion. So when you're going through the full range of motion, maybe you have soreness in certain positions here. Maybe you want to back off on certain movements or build up or increase that range of motion intensity so you're able to get to certain movements, certain overhead lifts without compromise or compensations to other parts of your body. So that's another one, because if you don't use it, your body will atrophy and it'll conserve energy, and it'll more or less not give you what you've had before. And that's where you have to build it up and then maintain it. And that's where most people either have to get to, where it's very difficult to just start and then maintain for years on end. So that's when we get to scheduling things out. It becomes very important.
Yep, awesome. That was beautiful. And a lot of people don't know this, but we lose so much collagen each year after we age, I think the age of 25 or so, which is super important for connective tissue. As we age anyway, we already have these degradative properties in our body, and so we only should be training not only muscle, but connective tissue as well, limit injury, and further solidify our ability to be strong without worrying about injury too. So yeah, with that though, we get into the actual training portion. There's going to be times of soreness, and there's going to be times of maybe taking breaks, rest days, but we can be intentional about those days off. And before we even get into some of the fun ways to recover, Doc, do you want to incorporate any types of detraining and other types of, do you want to do that right now, or how do you want to get into that?
We can get into some of the detraining. So when we were talking about the stimulus, like stimulating training versus retrain versus detraining, detraining is usually the rest recovery aspect. Let's get into that after talking about certain things that we need to maintain or build up muscle. So I know we've talked on the previous, like protein intake and certain maybe nutrients, carbs, fats. Do you want to dive into that and then we can get...
So I think a lot of people understand we need to ingest protein if we're going to build muscle. It's important to still ingest a lot of protein as we maintain it, and it's the same way to even overcome an injury or just heal.
Yeah.
I don't know how many times I've had young men especially start to increase their protein intake and their pain goes away. And it's just, it's phenomenal to see that small bit of effort change so much in their life. And a lot of people are so stressed and they just aren't eating as much as they should be. And even that can incorporate or cause a lot of pain that they have. But I would say if you are going to be putting in bouts of effort weekly, your protein intake should be higher than what you normally are already considering probably consuming. If you have a tough time eating, then you need to be consuming more protein shakes. Probably if it's easier, you can incorporate that. But a lot of people have this misconception too that I shouldn't be consuming as much protein in one setting because of maybe past research that you've heard about, but that's now been dismissed.
Yes.
We've even seen studies up to 100 grams of protein in one setting is super helpful for protein synthesis, even 24 to 48 hours after you've done something like that. So you can absolutely start consuming 50 to 100 grams of protein per setting for a meal if you only feel like you can hit 1 or 2 meals a day. So what I would recommend is 1:1 ratio for gram to kilogram of weight. I think that's going to be pretty standard across the board. If you're going to be doing higher bouts of effort, that might even be 1.2 to 1.6, just depending on your goals. Carbohydrates are still very important, but making sure that's coming from a whole food source. Processed carbs are just going to be limiting you and really just empty calories. And then good fats are helpful for recovery, making sure that you do include them in certain ways. If you really want to know more about that, you can start to look at some of the past podcasts that we've done. But the main thing that I wanted to take home with recovery is going to be, your limitation is going to be how much protein you're intaking. You will see a difference if you don't hit enough. They've also shown that if you're actually cutting and you don't consume 0.75 to 1 kg ratio, you will actually lose 6% muscle per, I think, what is it? Per 1 month of cutting each month, if you're not even maintaining 0.75.
Wow.
I think that's what the stat was. You have to, I just put up on my story, but just even missing that while you're cutting,
that's right.
you'll actually see that deficit. So what that means is if you're going to cut, a lot of people think you have to eat less. That's somewhat true, but you need to make sure you're maintaining the muscle mass you put on while you've gained. And if you choose to eat less to cut, you're going to lose that muscle mass coming off with cut. So to maintain it, you should at least, it says 0.75 was in the study, but I think still maintaining a 1:1 ratio while you're cutting, super, super important. Don't lose what you worked so hard to put on. And muscle is incredibly important in that state. No, I think that's something that people should not be afraid of consuming more. Even some individuals can get up to that 150, 200 grams of protein, no problem. Super helpful for you.
I love that.
Yep.
So we need a high stimulus. We need a lot of protein. Obviously, we want to make sure that we're having enough healthy fats, good oils coming into the body as well. So there's certain things that your tissues need, whether it's even fish oils in addition to that as well.
Yep. Creatine is incredibly important. Magnesium is super helpful for certain muscular processes. Those are the pretty big three, I would say. Vitamin D, I'm just going to throw it out there because I think it's super helpful. Those would really be the core supplements that I think you can increase your performance with, and a good hydration, of course.
Love that.
But yeah, most people should get the basics down first before thinking that's what's going to separate them from that 5% edge. The supplements give you that 5%, but the bulk of it is good sleep for recovery. It's eating over 100 grams of protein a day, and it's moving your body consistently. That's 85% of it, right there.
That's perfect.
The rest is tweaking yourself to get some 5 to 10% extra edge up. The bulk of it is going to be that.
So, Doc, is there any other fun tips that you may have on the recovery side of things? And then I have a fun one at the end.
Yeah.
For you too, but.
I would say for those who truly feel like they have hit the core, they're sleeping well, they are eating enough, and their exercise has been consistent. Days of detraining, we'll call it, where we're recovering, we're resting. Cold plunging has been one that I feel contributes to so much of an effect of not only the physical, but the mental. Stress resilience, it helps to decrease muscle soreness, and there even is starting to show some anabolism to it if you do it a certain way. That's usually cold plunge before an exercise.
Yes.
Anecdotally has been showing changes in anabolism, testosterone production, which I'm excited to see research on that. Whether it's true or not, I don't know, but a lot of people are saying that it really is effective. Other things would be hot therapy, sauna use, again, is super helpful. We've talked on hot and cold therapy a lot in the past. I think that's also very helpful, not only for the musculoskeletal processes, but cardiovascularly, and it can be extremely helpful. That can be something that you incorporate. Other things, you could do vasonomatic training, where you have the what are they even called? Like Normatec legs on, where they're compression therapy. That's also very helpful. You could incorporate red light laser, like you've talked about. These are all things that I think do make a difference. Seeing a chiropractor, physical therapist, making sure you have a body expert on your side to help you recover or rest on the days that are off of training. And then I think, again, sleep is super important. I can't touch on that enough. Making sure you're tracking that with either a Whoop band or something that's getting you the idea of how much deep sleep and REM sleep you have is going to be something that is going to be important. And really just even practicing meditation and breath work. Those would be the last, I think, tidbits where you're helping to improve your heart rate variability. We've talked about that. That's increasing heart rate variability is going to only improve your recovery. Tracking that with a Whoop band can be helpful. Just knowing that you're not overdoing it, your heart rate variability can stay high, so you're recovering, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, a lot of times I use when someone wants to recover from an injury or they want to build up a lot of tissue really quickly, my mind always goes to the recovery aspect, because I think most of the time someone, especially a higher end level athletes, they can push themselves. But even if it's someone completely that is like untrained, if we push them a little bit, they still need a decent amount of recovery.
100%.
And that's where my mind goes of like small either yoga nidra sessions, like at 20 minutes after the session, or a small nap, definitely no longer than 90 minutes, because your body works in ultradian cycles every 90 minutes, or just even down regulation breathing at the end of the workout or after a large bout of exercise. So longer exhale breathing gets you back to baseline, thus so you can build it up from there.
Yep.
So those would be a few. In addition to, there's also some research on decreasing your core body temperature. So if you're doing a high bout of effort, you want to continue to train more and build up certain other tissues, or go into a higher stimulating phase for longer periods of time, your body will naturally get warmer, it'll ramp up, and one of the main barriers to not allow you to continue the work is your body temperature threshold will only get to a certain point, and then certain other systems will start like tapering off. Your mind will start becoming fatigued. As you lower that core body temperature, whether it's running cool water over your hands, forehead, bottom of your feet, just a different type of glomerulus cell that pretty much regulates to your core body temperature to diminish that, you're able to do more work, and we're even see it has better results than steroids by doing more effort. It also can help, let's say if you're get into an anxiety state, you also want to shock the system, so then it would be counterintuitive to where you'd think to where you'd want to get into a stimulating like a cold plunge or putting your face into cold water for a brief second, which can almost shock the system to lower it back down. So there's two different things with that there. But in terms of muscle, we're going to need a mixture of down regulation breathing, kind of like you said, meditative state, breath work, diminish your core body temperature so you can either do more work if you like, or for the recovery aspect, or naps afterwards, anywhere from like 20 minutes, 10 to 20 minutes, yoga nidra, or no longer than 90 minutes after for a nap as well.
Love it.
Yeah.
And all of these, obviously, you guys can jump into our main pods to learn more about this. But Doc, one more thing I wanted to ask, because I think it's going to trigger some questions. What we're talking about right now is
Cool.
What's a quick off day training look like then? What are some things that maybe people aren't doing on an off day that they could incorporate?
That's a good question. So for off day training, so going back to the stimulus, retraining, detraining zones are the days that you're either, like you said, off days. Maybe we still want to do something. I would start thinking about either a chiropractic session, making sure all the joints are moving so that there's nothing fixated or stuck, which will also help the recovery aspect. I would want to get into light mobility work, whether it's lightly going through all the workspaces, moving all the joints to the fullest range of motion, going to a nice, like either meditative walk, for example, the pups in the morning or in the evening. Focus on either after that breath work, so get into more inhales than exhales, almost like a hyperventilated state, holding that for a period of time with your breath holding in, and then go into like long exhale breathing so you can ramp up your nervous system. You can train different parts of your body, whether it's breath work, whether it's mobility outside of just the training itself.
Yep.
Any of the ones that you brought up, cold plunge, I love that. Any sauna work is also really good. And then even trying different new activities, like go and play either a session of pickleball with friends, or a golfing session, or hitting the links up, putt golf, something that can engage the social aspect. So you're getting other parameters, but you're still having fun, but you're also getting motion and movement in your body that you still need for the recovery aspect. So
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah, I think this was a good, nice segment that really just incorporated everything we've talked about now in the last, anything we've talked about with muscle. I think it was 2 or 3 podcasts we've done now. It really had all of it incorporated into it. So we love talking about it because we know it's important. And I think you guys should start to invest the time into building muscle and invest it is truly one of the biggest assets you could have in this life is good muscle mass and health, far more than money.
Yes.
You can't buy it. You can't buy muscle.
Most millionaires only want either a healthy body, healthy family.
Yep. Seriously, that's what they're wishing. That's what they're hoping for.
Yep.
So don't sacrifice that to get where you want and then realize it's too late.
100%.
Yep.
Love that.
Anything else, Doc?
That, I know there's a lot more stuff that we want to touch on upcoming podcasts, but that was the nuts and bolts.
That was.
I love it.
So again, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. We will see you next on the next course series. And until next time, guys, have a great day.
Woo! Share, subscribe. Let's go.
Disclaimer: the content provided in this health podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or 911 immediately. Reliance on any information provided in this podcast is solely at your own risk. The creators and hosts of this podcast are not responsible for any actions or decisions you may take based on the information presented.
Thanks for joining us on The Functional Code. For more evidence-based health insights, subscribe, rate and review wherever you get your podcasts. Remember, your journey to a healthier you begins with understanding the Functional Code. Until next time, stay well, stay informed, and embrace the science of living well.